The question is that the motion be agreed to. The Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Speaker, the Labor Party will support this bill, is generally supportive of this bill, as I believe most parties in the House are, but reserves the right, as we go through the Select Committee process, to review our support based on information provided by submitters, as is the normal process. This is a substantial bill, over 500 pages. I thought I'd seen the largest bill that was put through a Commonwealth Parliament, I think, in this Parliament when I chaired FEC, which was the tax simplification legislation, which was 2 volumes that was about a foot high. This is bordering on that, but I mean no disrespect to the legislation. It is necessary, and we support that. I echo the Minister's comments about the environment that we see ourselves in. If you look at the last 4 years, the evidence shows us that there have been 61 finance companies that have failed over the last 4 years, the latest of which we know being South Canterbury Finance, which was bailed out to the tune of $1.6 billion of taxpayers' funds. Now, we know that most of those, or those depositors, will get their money back, given the government scheme of arrangement that was put in place originally by the previous government, but other depositors in other situations similar to that may not be so lucky. What this tells us is that there is no way you can zero risk an investment. And what I would like to ask the government to look at as it goes through not just this legislation, it doesn't matter how much regulation and legislation you put through, people will take investment risks. What is lacking, and I know it's not appropriate in this bill, is some financial literacy education support for our communities to raise their financial literacy and to become far more au fait with the levels of risk that they embark on when they invest their dollar. We can have all the rules, in my view, we like to ensure that people act appropriately when giving advice, when putting financial products on the market, where company directors act appropriately. But if people don't have the confidence because they don't have the basic, confidence is the right word, to assess investments, then that is a gap in our system which no legislation will actually take care of. That becomes the ambulance at the top of the cliff if people have the confidence to assess risk. And as I say, no legislation can zero risk any investment or proposition. I note that the government might also, I'm not going to go into the great detail of this bill, I think the Minister's covered it, but I just note in passing, and I think my colleague Leanne Dalzell may have made these comments recently, that the government as an adjunct to this might also want to look at the criminal penalties and sentencing arrangements in respect of so-called white-collar criminals. Because the evidence is reasonably clear, I think my colleague made the point recently, that if you're a burglar, you're often treated far more harshly by the courts, having no disrespect and not to downplay the impact, the emotional impact of a burglary, but it generally is localised to a small group of individuals, compared to the massive emotional impact that a white-collar criminal who engages in fraud or embezzlement or misrepresentation can have, as we've seen, throughout our communities. So it is another issue, I suppose, adjunct that I might invite the Minister to take up with his colleague, the Minister of Justice, in respect of the penalties around white-collar crime. The bill, I note, also provides regulations to be made that will prevent products being structured to avoid regulation. Seems self-evident. And this happened, of course, in the infamous Mark Byers blue chip case, because that investment scheme offered interests in land. It was exempt from the Securities Act, to the significant detriment of investors. And I welcome the fact that those issues are going to be catered for in this bill. It will be interesting to see. It always worries me when I see bills of this size, to see what officials have come up with, and it will be very interesting to see the various financial stakeholders in the financial and securities sector, various other submitters with expertise, the law societies, the Institute of Chartered Accountants and others, who presumably will come before the Select Committee and render their view on it. One would hope that this legislation will not wrap people in undue red tape. Whilst I accept absolutely that the safeguards are incredibly necessary, and this reform provides a one-stop shop, as as I say, you can't regulate for a zero-risk investment. So it will be interesting to see if the government, through the Select Committee process, where submitters come up with productive and positive ideas around this and perhaps ways to do things better that officials may not have thought of, whether that will be taken on board by the government. And as I say, we reserve our right to review our level of support based on that response. I just note in passing the Minister made reference to the Capital Markets Development Task Force. I would just note that the previous government and the previous Minister, Leanne Dalzell, in 2008 established that task force as a blueprint and action plan for the development of New Zealand's financial systems. Very good minister, very good action, and we're pleased to see that the government, as they reported to this government, as our government acquiesced, as it were, and it's pleasing to see that the government is now taking on some of those recommendations. It is appropriate that we have legislation like this, given, as the Minister said, the global financial crisis, the failure of finance companies and the general lack of confidence by ordinary New Zealanders and those who provide advice, those who provide products in the financial sector for investors. And an economy can only thrive where there is investor confidence, where people are prepared to lay a dollar down and risk it, but knowing there is an appropriate level playing field and an appropriate regulatory framework whereby everybody adheres to the rules and people get a fair shake. That does not, of course, guarantee that you will make a profit or a substantial profit, but it means that certain assessments can be made in respect of levels of risk and that people can do that in an open and transparent way. So the Labor Party will support this bill through the Select Committee process. I note the cooperative nature with which the Commerce Committee acts, and the chair has set a high benchmark and a high example in that respect. And I do think there is not a heck of a lot of politics in this, apart from trying to get the best possible outcome. And I would hope, and I'm sure it will happen at the Select Committee, but I would hope that submitters are given as wider an opportunity to work through the massive detail that resides in this weighty tome, and also that the Minister is open in a bipartisan way to suggestions from all parties based on advice from submitters where deficiencies in this piece of legislation may be identified and where this legislation can be improved. And I note that the Minister has extended the branch of cooperation, and we look forward to that being maintained, because I think for all of us this particular piece of legislation cuts to the quick with most of our constituents. There would not be an electorate in this country that hasn't been touched or visited upon by undue financial loss as the result of nefarious activity of some. This will bring, as I say, a one-stop shop together. This should combat a lot of that and give people the confidence to invest in businesses and make sound investment decisions. So we look forward to the scrutiny. We believe this will take some time to scrutinise and should be given a due time period to go through the detail given its length and breadth. We look forward to working with submitters and we look forward to a positive outcome for our investment community.
Call Todd McLeay.
Mr Speaker, thank you. It gives me pleasure to rise to speak on the Financial Markets Conduct Bill. Can I thank